Broadcasting live from the Subaru of Gwinnett studio inside the Sonesta Gwinnett Place Atlanta Hotel. It's time for Travel Safely with Brian Mulligan. Travel Safely is presented by Applied Information, creator of the Travel Safely smartphone app.
Welcome everyone to Travel Safely, the business talk show bringing you the latest in innovation from transportation, technology and entrepreneurship. I'm your host, Brian Mulligan, coming to you from the Subaru Business RadioX studio in Gwinnett, Georgia. This show is sponsored by Applied Information, a technology company here in Gwinnett, focused on using technology to save lives and improve traffic, based here in Gwinnett. Safety is a major question in the transportation industry. 40,000 people in the United States die on the roads each year, and we waste millions of dollars in congestion. Something has to be done, and we at Travel Safely are trying to address these problems in a new way. Our guest today is Charlotte Nash, who's the chair of the Gwinnett County Commission here in Georgia. Welcome, Charlotte.
Good morning, Brian. I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us. Our topic for the day is this daily commute of hundreds of thousands of people here in Gwinnett, coming through and out of one of the largest suburban counties in the nation. How to accommodate the growth and improve safety and mobility in general. So, Charlotte, I know you've got a busy time with this referendum coming up, but before we get into the specifics of transit in Gwinnett, tell us the Charlotte Nash story. You've been active in government for all these years. How did you end up being the chair of the Gwinnett County Commission?
Well, I am a native of Gwinnett County. I still live in the same community my father's family came to in the 1820s, very deeply rooted in Gwinnett County. I worked as an employee for Gwinnett County for almost 28 years, retired, went away and was doing consulting and enjoying myself traveling, and then the individual who was commission chair before me resigned in the middle of his term, and as my husband put it, I lost my mind and decided to run for elected office. And here I am, 8 years later, still serving as chair of the commission.
Oh, fantastic. It's quite nice to be able to have this conversation with elected officials because we're in the technology transportation space, as you know, and sometimes we think that our message falls on deaf ears with elected officials. So talk to us a little bit about where you see mobility and roadway and transportation fitting into the priorities for Gwinnett.
Well, certainly, for most people in their day-to-day lives, transportation and the difficulty they have traveling within Gwinnett County and across the entire metro area is one of the most important issues. It comes up in every discussion practically when people talk about things they'd like to see different about the community. So from both a short-term and a long-term perspective, it is one of the top priorities for Gwinnett County, right there with public safety, and as you've already mentioned, it has an impact on that as well when we have trouble with congestion.
All right. The business of what to do about the traffic is just a vexatious problem that's been practically unsolvable as we've had growth, and we all love economic growth. More and more people need to travel, and this congestion problem has just proven to be a difficult problem. We obviously on the technology side, we're doing our bit to try and motivate change using technology, but there's a big day coming up for you guys and us in Gwinnett on March the 19th. Voters will go to the polls to cast ballots on whether to bolster transportation with transit. Talk to us a little bit about this transit referendum and what it means.
Well, we certainly are facing. We already have such an issue with mobility and congestion, and the need to provide additional options for travel to the residents of Gwinnett County. Faced with the prospect of another 500,000 people headed our way in the next 20 to 25 years. And I don't know about you, but I think every single person that moves to Gwinnett brings 3 cars with them. And
Definitely.
I'm not sure how they do it, but I believe that they manage to have all 3 on the road at the same time. But another 500,000 people headed this way. The expansion of the port at Savannah means that a lot more freight movements are headed towards Gwinnett as well. That's all great from an economic standpoint, but it does make the challenge that we have in the mobility area even greater. As we have looked at this issue over the last 3 years or so, we finally sorted out in our minds that we had to offer additional transit options as one of the approaches to trying to provide options for people in terms of how they travel through the county. And we worked with the community, had a great engineering firm that worked with us from the technical analysis standpoint, and put together Connect Gwinnett, which is our transit development plan.
Okay.
That's the basis for what we're proposing to do if the referendum passes.
Right. Well, I mean, I'm a numbers guy, so there are roughly 800,000 people in Gwinnett right now. Is
More
that
like 950,000.
950,000. But nonetheless, when you add another 500,000, we're talking about adding 50%.
That's close to it, and Gwinnett at that point in time will be the largest county in the state of Georgia. We are projected to exceed the population of Fulton County, which of course is the only county larger than Gwinnett now. And the counties to our east and south and north are going to continue to grow too, and all the tags on our roads are not Gwinnett. There are lots of other folks trying to travel through Gwinnett.
Right, and the way I think about these, I'm kind of a simple guy when it comes to the math. So we're going to add 50% more people.
Yes.
And if one says, well, conservatively, that's going to add 50% more cars. But what we know is if we add 10% more cars, we're going to have complete gridlock.
In certain areas, there's no doubt about that. And I would argue that we're about at gridlock at certain times of the day. Down the I-85 corridor, for example, it's miserable travel conditions for the people that have to do that on a daily basis.
Right. So the way I see it, and we're as you know in the technology space. So what our technology does is helps transit work better by getting it green lights at traffic intersections and all of that kind of stuff, and all of that will follow in due course. But the main focus is getting people out of single occupancy vehicles.
That's right.
And getting them into multi-occupancy vehicles.
That's right. There's a statistic that is used by related to the express buses that travel in the Peach Pass lane. While they represent only about 3% of the vehicles in that lane during rush hour, they actually carry between 25 and 30% of the people traveling. That's a great visual, a great example of what we're talking about, what we can do to make the most of the capacity in the roadways now, and technology is certainly a part of that.
Right, and so it would seem to me that the choices that we're facing, and I do understand that there's that the Gwinnett can't advocate for a referendum as public officials. You can just present the facts.
Yes, sir.
But I'm an interpreter, so I see things in simple terms. Your choices are to either drive transit through choice. We vote yes in the referendum, which we as a company are advocating for.
Yes.
You then deploy transit. You make the transit work better, encourage people to ride transit, and everybody wins because there are fewer vehicles on the road. The alternative is you vote no in the referendum. We do nothing about transit. We make everybody's lives miserable by being stuck continuously in traffic as this growth comes to us, and then we do transit because it's really the only thing to do.
And the longer we put it off, the harder it is to do and the more expensive it's going to be, because the cost of this type of capital improvement only grows with time. Gwinnett County is a big county, and there's 437 square miles. But the transit plan actually has matched up different modes of transit to the different areas of the county based more or less on density of population and jobs. So the far eastern part of the county where I live, there'll probably be flex service and also an express route along the 316 corridor, where there'll be bus rapid transit and even a rail extension in the more western part of the county. So we have tried to be very deliberate in the way we look at how to use the dollars in the best way to provide as much service to the entire county as possible. And you talked about technology. One of the important aspects of technology is is helping buses travel as well as they possibly can. So even buses that are traveling in mixed traffic, we're looking at having ways for them to jump the queue at intersections and that sort of thing. So technology is definitely part of the game plan as we move forward with transit.
One of the things that we know, and I know this is a radio show, but nonetheless, I've got a visual aid. I'm just holding up my smartphone, and what it is that the smartphone this whole technology is only 11 years old.
Yes.
And so we see that how it's transformed our lives. So one of the things that we know is
it's a permanent attachment to people.
You're absolutely right, both in their cars as well as in their daily lives. And one of the things that we know that the pace of change of technology is just huge. And one of the things I like about some of the transit plan with the flex or flexibility of bus rapid transit and so forth is the ability to be able to adapt using technology, that if these 500,000 people choose to settle on the east side of the county, one has the ability to be flexible and to adapt.
Well, certainly anything that you're talking about, a long-term proposition like transit is, things are going to change across time, so we had better build some flexibility into it to be able to respond to both changes in the community and advances in technology that affect transportation.
Right, so the only one thing that we're sure of is we can't build our way out of this with concrete and asphalt.
Not by itself. Now, I don't want anybody to think that we are suggesting we're not going to continue to do road improvements.
Oh, yes.
They're still very important, but we can't do just road improvements. We have to look at the transit improvements as well.
One of the things that we talk about in transportation is the last mile. How do you get people from their homes to the transit point? And there's micro-mobility, micro-transit and things. But there's also these things called scooters that are coming are scooters coming to Gwinnett. How are you looking at this change?
We have actually had a few of them, I suppose, ridden out from parts of Atlanta and left. So we're still grappling with it. With a county as large as Gwinnett I think it's our cities likely or where there's going to be the scooter issue initially, but we're watching very carefully to see what other communities are doing to manage that particular aspect. It can be a challenge to traffic movement, but it also is a way for people to get around differently too.
Yeah, it's interesting that it's one of the things is that welcome to the great American way, which is that a year or two ago we were all talking about bike share and bicycles and things like that, and then just one day scooters came along.
Yes.
And it was case of some entrepreneur somewhere with this connected world of apps and so forth saying, oh, well, micro-mobility is a thing. Let's see whether people like it. And one of the things that young folks in the cities, they really seem to like it because these scooters are everywhere.
They certainly are. I was in San Diego last year, and I think there were probably more scooters on the streets than there were cars. Very prevalent there.
And again, that's always the interesting problem between local authorities and the entrepreneurial sector. Now, I'm not. I'm on the entrepreneurial side, you see. So I believe in change and believe in the ability for businesses to affect change just by coming up with better ideas. But on the other hand, you've got the local authority says, well, these are our roads and our communities. We need to regulate scooters. So this must present some challenges in your commission meetings as just to how heavy a hand you should deal with regulation.
Well, and the scooters are a great example of it. That's a constant battle within a local government, is to find the right balance between doing what you really need to do to help the safety and of the entire community, but not being so heavy-handed that you squash good ideas in the formation of those. We constantly work at that to try to make sure that we are not just automatically, as a reflexive action, saying no change.
Yeah, which is definitely a challenge in local authorities. After the break, we'll look at regional transportation issues and what lies in store for residents as a result of the ATL. So on that note, here's 30 Seconds with Sarah.
This is your 30 seconds or less with Sarah. Early voting starts now and until March 19th for the approval of MARTA in Gwinnett County. The referendum would approve a pending contract between the two agencies and enact a new 1% sales tax. By approving this referendum, county residents would expand transit options exclusively for the benefit of Gwinnett, somewhere in the realm of billions of dollars. Potential projects include a heavy rail extension from the Dorville station, bus maintenance and an extension, and a new bus rapid transit line. Considering that Gwinnett is poised to grow more than 50% in the next few years, some state that a transit bill is necessary sooner rather than later. Back to you, Brian.
In case you're just joining us, this is Travel Safely with Brian Mulligan, how to save lives and improve traffic, with our guest, Gwinnett County Commission Chair Charlotte Nash. Charlotte, you were instrumental, along with Senator Brandon Beach and Representative Kenneth Tanner, in bringing some cohesion to Metro Atlanta's hodgepodge of transit systems with the ATL. Tell us about the ATL and what it means for the Metro and for the planning of transit in the future.
Of course, and I had a very small part. Representative Tanner and Senator Beach certainly were the leads on this, but I was glad to be able to lend a little bit of push at the local level. I'm really excited about the prospect that the ATL brings to a 13-county region that it has responsibility for, not to supersede local decision-making, but rather to help make sure that what's done on transit within that 13-county region makes sense, that it's a cohesive approach to providing transit services to the traveling public, that, it doesn't an individual can plan a trip and make that trip without having to worry which transit provider, that it all makes sense and they have access to good information for all of the systems that exist.
All right, so where we're up to with the ATL and when we're going to see some changing. I know that there's been the board is put in place. Where we're up to in this process?
Well, of course, the first thing that the board had to do was to get organized, and the staff has been working hard to help the board do that. But contracts are on the verge of going out to start the work of actually developing the coordinated transit plan for the 13-county region. That's one of the primary responsibilities of the ATL, and local governments will be expected to choose their transit projects from that approved transit plan that the ATL puts together. Of course, there's been a branding effort by ATL, because that's also one of the legislated mandates, that there be an overall branding for transit in the Atlanta area, and ATL has responsibility for developing that.
I noticed that there's, I've heard down in the Capitol, there's a bill working its way through the Georgia House to expand the ATL to the whole of Georgia. It's
really not expanding the ATL. The ATL will still be limited to, the authority will be limited to the 13-county region. But the idea of bringing more cohesiveness to transit in the rest of the state, the basic idea is going forward, proposed to create an Office of Mobility at the state government level that would pull together all the streams of funding related to transit that come from the federal government. And that includes Medicaid, other types of dollars that are available for certain people, that have mobility challenges or other kind of issues. There's a lot of dollars that flow to the state that wind up being used for transportation, and it's tough for people at the local level who are trying to provide transit services to manage those. Each program has its own rules. We were talking about regulation. Yeah. Local governments are victims of over-regulation, we would argue sometimes, too. So
that's a good point.
That's one of the primary purposes of the legislation that's making its way through now.
One of the things that we're in the private sector, and particularly in the technology of private sector, we see this disconnect. In the past, local authorities, Gwinnett County or Georgia Department of Transportation, would see companies like us as suppliers. Mm-hmm. So transportation's been in the asset purchase business for 100 years, buying
Yes.
roads, concrete, asphalt, and so forth. But now, and I'm holding up my phone again, with this advent of this new world, the Internet of Things, cloud computing, and so forth, we're on the private sector side believe that a more appropriate approach should be collaboration and partnership. Because we bring innovation, private sector capital,
Yes.
and so forth, trying to do more with less. Any thoughts or advice for companies and entrepreneurs about how they should tackle dealing with transportation or Gwinnett as a local authority?
Right. Certainly Gwinnett is open to those kind of ideas. In fact, it's not transportation, but it is innovation. I mean, we are seeking private sector partners related to our water and sewer issues. We have had a very active research program going on related to the water and sewer area that involves private sector as well as educational institutions with it. One of my suggestions always is in a space where there's not a path laid out in terms of how to accomplish something. I always suggest the idea of pilot projects. Sometimes if you can convince, if you can point to a project that has been a success, that makes other local governments more willing to take a little different approach. The procurement area in local governments is a tricky kind of issue because we are so constrained by accusations that we play favorites with different companies and that sort of thing. So there is a built-in reticence to appear to be partnering with a particular company without there being some type of competitive process. And oftentimes that is not the best way to approach things that are innovative. It can stifle the innovation aspect of it. So we're grappling ourselves with how we deal with this in the water and sewer area, and I anticipate we'll see some of the same kind of pressures related to technology innovation as well.
Yes, indeed. And so one of the things that we're doing in the private sector, in the innovation sector, is advocating for moving local authorities to what we're calling outcomes-based contracting.
Yes.
So if you need to move people in transit, let's say, think about, instead of buying this and buying that and buying the other thing, try and buy the outcome that you want, which is mobility, and with performance level agreements and so forth. And then it's up to us in the private sector to group together to say, how can we best provide the mobility that Gwinnett needs? So that's one of the things that you'll see some advocacy from our side, is to move towards this outcomes-based contracting.
Sounds intriguing. And I'm not sure whether you may very well be aware of this. Gwinnett County actually is getting ready to start a demonstration project on Peachtree Industrial Boulevard. Yes, so we're excited about. We obviously recognize the role that technology is going to play in transportation, and we're excited to be talking about a 20-mile corridor as opposed to some of the smaller corridors that have previously been put in place. We think Peachtree Industrial Boulevard is a great example because it goes from 40,000 cars at the southern end to maybe 15,000 cars at the northern end. A lot of variation from south to north.
Yeah, that's going to be a great pilot project, and we're really interested in it because it runs right past our offices in Gwinnett.
Yes,
We're on
indeed.
Peachtree Industrial. Charlotte, thanks so much. Thanks for listening to Travel Safely, brought to you by Applied Information, the show about transportation, technology, innovation, and entrepreneurship. Today we've been talking about transit mobility and roadway safety with Gwinnett County Chair Charlotte Nash. Charlotte, thanks for all you do and helping to make Gwinnett County and the world a better place.
Thank you, and thank you for having me on the show. It was great to have this conversation.
Fantastic. Until next time, this is Brian Mulligan signing off from Business Radio X, and travel safely.